Patton vomited. Bradley went silent. Eisenhower gave an order: march 1,000 German civilians through the gates of this camp and make them look. He knew if no one saw it, within 10 years, the world would call it propaganda. That order broke an entire town. To understand why, you need to read what their mayor wrote 3 months earlier, while prisoners were starving past his window. January 1945. The town of Ohrdruf in the Thuringian countryside. Mayor Albert Schneider sits at his desk and drafts a formal petition to the district authority. He has a complaint. Every day, columns of concentration, camp inmates are marched through his town. Starving men, beaten men, shuffling through the streets in wooden clogs, their bodies wasted down to the architecture of their own skeletons. And Mayor Schneider's grievance? He doesn't protest the starvation. He doesn't object to the beatings. He writes, and this is a direct record, that the sight of these prisoners is, quote, not exactly pleasant for the population. He requests that their marching routes be diverted. Not so they'll be treated better. So his townspeople won't have to look at them. Remember that letter, because in 3 months, an American colonel is going to force Mayor Schneider to look at something far worse. And what Schneider sees that day will kill him before sunrise. Between April 4th and April 11th, the American Third Army punches into Thuringia. The 4th Armored Division, the 89th Infantry, the 6th Armored, battle-hardened units that have fought their way across France and into Germany. These men have seen combat. They've seen death. But nothing has prepared them for what they find behind the wire. At Ohrdruf, the soldiers walk into a landscape that doesn't belong in the 20th century. Lime-covered bodies, charred remains on iron grates, a 40-foot-wide pit where prisoners were forced to kneel in a circle before an SS medical officer shot them one by one in the back of the head. The tangled mass of corpses is still in the pit. The smell is so thick it feels solid. A dense, sweet rot that clings to your uniform, your skin, your hair. You can taste it. On April 12th, Dwight Eisenhower flies in. Patton is with him, Bradley too. 3 of the most powerful military commanders on the planet, standing at the edge of that pit. And Patton, George Patton, the man who'd led armored columns across Sicily and France, walks behind a building and vomits. But Eisenhower doesn't look away, because he sees something beyond the horror. He sees a problem, a massive geopolitical vulnerability. The scale of this atrocity is so extreme, so far beyond what any civilian would consider possible, that Eisenhower realizes the truth itself is at risk. If the Allies simply bury the dead, clean the camps, and keep pushing east, within a decade, Nazi sympathizers will call it propaganda, exaggeration, Allied lies. The sheer unbelievability of this crime is its best defense against history. Therefore, Eisenhower makes a decision that will shatter the psychological foundation of an entire society. He orders journalists flown in, congressmen, editors, and most crucially, he orders the German civilians, the ones who lived 5 miles from these camps, who smelled the smoke, who watched the columns march past their windows, to be dragged through the gates and forced to see exactly what their silence had purchased. So on the morning of April the 16th, 1,000 citizens of Weimar assemble at the railway station. And here is where the story turns surreal. Because these people don't know what they're walking into. Or rather, they've spent years making sure they don't know. The propaganda has worked. The cognitive dissonance is total. So when the American city commander orders them to march 5 miles uphill to the Buchenwald camp on the Ettersberg, many of them treat it like a civic event. Women put on bright, colorful spring dresses, their best hats. Men wear formal suits. They dress for this the way you'd dress for an Easter parade. Picture that column. 1,000 well-dressed Germans are marching uphill in the crisp 48-degree April air, flanked by American jeeps. The women's heels clicking on the road, the men adjusting their hat brims against the wind. A pristine column of bourgeois normalcy climbing steadily toward a place where 56,000 human beings were worked, starved, and burned to death. They reach the gates around midday. And the first thing they see isn't the dead, it's a zoo. Right there, just outside the barbed wire. The Buchenwald Zoo. Built by the SS for their own amusement. A bear pit. Exotic birds. Monkeys. The guards who ran this camp spent their off hours tossing fresh meat to captive bears while, on the other side of a single fence, human beings starved until they resorted to cannibalism. But the civilians don't process that contradiction. Not yet. The zoo is a psychological anchor. It looks normal. It feels domestic. So the defense mechanisms hold. And that is why the archival footage shows those women walking through the gatehouse arch with smiles on their faces, because in their minds, they are still in the Germany they've always known. They are about to leave it forever. The American lieutenant waiting in the crematorium courtyard doesn't shout. He doesn't rage. He speaks in a flat, neutral, implacable voice, the cadence of an engineer reading a technical manual. He explains how the ovens work. He recites the mortality figures. He describes the combustion process with the emotional register of a man explaining how a furnace heats a building, and that neutrality is devastating because it gives the civilians nowhere to hide. There's no angry American to dismiss, no propaganda to reject. Just facts are delivered without affect in a courtyard that still smells like burned bone. Then they're moved forward, past the wagons. You've seen photographs of those wagons, naked bodies stacked like cordwood, limbs locked in the grotesque angles of rigor mortis. But photographs don't carry the smell. They don't carry the weight of standing 3 feet from a human hand dangling over the edge of a cart, while a woman in a floral dress beside you begins to hyperventilate. But the worst is still ahead, because the survivors have prepared something. In front of Block 2, a pristine wooden table has been arranged, and on it, a display that will haunt every person in that courtyard for the rest of their lives. Glass jars. Inside them, human organs, lungs, hearts, sliced and floating in preservation fluid. Next to the jars, pieces of tanned human skin, carefully selected for their colorful tattoos. And beside those, a desk lamp, functional, elegant, made entirely from human flesh. And at the end of the table, 2 objects that cause at least one woman to lose consciousness on the spot. The shrunken heads of 2 young Polish prisoners, fist size, stuffed and preserved like taxidermy. The deep purple groove of the hangman's rope still visible around their tiny leathered necks. The smiling stops. The courtyard fractures into chaos. Older women collapse into theatrical weeping, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. Teenagers, kids raised entirely inside the Hitler Youth, who have never known a world outside the Reich, go completely silent. Not quiet, silent, catatonic, their mouths open, their eyes fixed on something their brains physically refuse to process. 17-year-old Elfriede Schlegelmilch will later testify that her only thought was, "This simply can't be real. Are you dreaming? Or what's going on here?" Decades later, she'll say, "If someone tries to tell me today that none of it ever happened, I can only reply that I saw it with my own eyes, and I will never, ever forget what I saw. American military nurses are stationed along the route with smelling salts. They're needed. So the column is eventually led back out, down the hill, toward Weimar. And you'd think the story ends there. 1,000 Germans, psychologically destroyed, stumbling home in their Sunday best, the bright dresses now reeking of decomposition. Margaret Bourke-White, the legendary Life magazine photographer who documented the entire day, will later write that the smell of death clung to those spring dresses long after the women descended the Ettersberg. But the story doesn't end there, because not everyone broke. Before the column is even out of sight of the camp perimeter, a small group of German women begins to chat again. Nervous banter, and then laughter. The sound of women laughing within eyeshot of a crematorium. The American escort commander hears it, and something inside him detonates. He halts the entire column. 1,000 people, stopped on the road. He turns them around, every single one, and he marches them back through the gates of Buchenwald. This time slower, deliberately, agonizingly slower, forcing them to walk past the wagons again, to breathe in the rot again, to stand before that table again, the shrunken heads, the lampshade, the jars. Every detail seared deeper the second time, because now there is no ignorance left to hide behind. Only the nauseating clarity of what they allowed to happen 5 miles from their doorstep. By the time the column finally returns to Weimar, the devastation is absolute. And that night, Mayor Schneider, the man who once complained that starving prisoners were not pleasant to look at, hangs himself, his wife beside him. His final words collapse 8 years of the Third Reich into 6. We didn't know, but we knew. He wasn't the only one. In Leipzig, the mayor poisons himself with cyanide. He takes his wife and his 20-year-old daughter with him. In the next office, the city treasurer does the same. Himself, his wife, his daughter. A cascade of bureaucratic suicides triggered not by the fall of Berlin or the advance of the Red Army, but by something far more lethal than any artillery shell. The simple, undeniable act of being forced to look. Eisenhower understood something that April. He understood that the most dangerous enemy of truth isn't the liar. It's the person who refuses to see. And the only weapon against willful blindness is forced sight. Those shrunken heads from the pathology table, they didn't disappear into history. The U.S. Army secured them as evidence. They were presented at the Buchenwald war crimes trial in Dachau in 1947. Today, one sits in the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Maryland. The other is held by the German Historical Museum in Berlin. Physical proof. Permanent, undeniable. Sitting in glass cases on 2 continents, so that no one ever again can say they didn't know.